Dan Solero, Mark Austin, please welcome them both.
All right, can you hear me okay? How's everyone doing? Are you enjoying the conference so far? Yes. All right, show of hands, who's been to our conference before? Last year? Okay. My joke's gonna work then, great. I'm Dan Solero with our Chief Security Office here at AT&T, and I've brought a friend, Mark Austin. I'm gonna do an intro for you because It's pretty impressive. So Mark's part of our Chief Data Office, and he is responsible for data science and automation, including 300 data scientists and engineers across the business, focusing on cost reduction and revenue generation. He leads development behind Ask AT&T, which we're going to talk about a bit here today. And then this part, good news, you're going to have to explain this to me. So yesterday, his team reclaimed the top spot in the world on Generative AI leaderboard. Bird benchmark, what is that? So first of all, congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So this is, it's one of the Gen AI leaderboards out there. This one is text to SQL, which means can you talk to databases and data in English and get an answer. So this particular problem was pretty tough. It was 95 databases, and we had 12,000 questions, and we had to score the highest on that. So it was pretty cool. Maybe some of my colleagues here from IBM, IBM, if they're in the audience there, they were #1 a few weeks ago, and then Google beat them, and then we just topped that one there. But it's a pretty cool list. You got them, you got Alibaba, Stanford, but it's a pretty cool list, so we're happy to be back on top there.
That's awesome, congrats. Yeah. Okay, so what we're gonna talk about here, the reason I brought Mark is throughout the day and probably for the past 18 months of your lives as security practitioners, looking at generative AI has been a challenge of, okay, what's risk versus reward? How do I manage this? How do I get inventory? What are the risks? But then also, how do we get some kind of value out of it while we're doing those things? So before I get into that, in my talk last year, at about this point in the interview, we were talking about the multiverse. So I don't want to talk about that, but do you have any thoughts?
No, I'll skip that one.
All right. When we look at generative AI here at AT&T, I know we've been at it. So you and your team demoed applied ChatGPT really, really early. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk through what our journey has been and sort of what you've focused on and what kind of business outcomes you've been able to drive?
So seems like it's a long time ago now, but back early 2023, ChatGPT came out, and it was like, holy smokes, this thing looks incredible. And all of a sudden, we saw our internal folks clamoring to use it. We said, we have to stand up something. Otherwise, what's going to happen is they're going to go out there, they're going to paste their code out on the internet, they're going to paste our secrets out there, and something's going to leak, right? So we had to get something secure. So we said, let's stand up something very quickly. Now, we were fortunate to have Microsoft Azure as a partner, which had the OpenAI endpoint. So we stood up a secure endpoint with the help of Dan and others, really quickly. And sure enough, after we did that, it was private, secure. They don't look at the data. It's not shared. Nobody uses it for training. And shortly thereafter, you probably saw the news. A few companies actually had a problem, right? The employees were pasting stuff out there, and it kind of showed up there. So that was the first thing we did. And then we started unlocking it. We started in Microsoft Teams, and then we did a web app, much like ChatGPT. And what we saw is the coders in the company were all over it. And we were seeing 40% or more of the questions they were asked was coding. And then we said, oh, well, is all code okay? Well, what about copyright code that it puts out? So we said, oh, damn, we got to get something. Let's get something to check what kind of code it's producing. So we put in copyright, copyleft. We put in an advisor there. You pull it up. You have to kind of click on it. You sure you want to do this? So we put that in place. And then we said, okay, well, that's good. We probably should put a little bit of content filtering on there as well. make sure the stuff going in and out is appropriate. And then we talked about, well, we got the name Ask AT&T. We really want to live up to that, right? So when it was first ChatGPT, or the GPT-4 endpoint, didn't know anything about AT&T. So we said, we have to have a vision of how you're going to live up to Ask AT&T. We want to teach it about AT&T. So what does that mean? It means kind of what we do with data. Not everybody has access to every data, right? Not everybody should have access to every document. So you have to bring in role-based access. So we came up with role-based access, and we started implementing question and answer, and it was really interesting. We put it out as a crowdsource. Does anybody have any use cases? I think I told this story last year. Within 3 weeks, we had 260 use cases. And we're like, holy smokes, there's a lot of use cases out there. We need some help. So we pushed it to the business units. We said, you prioritize the use cases, and we will stack rank them based on ROI. And then we did it, and we've got, I think we have 140 different domains, HR, finance, network, you name it, of question and answer type stuff. And you probably heard about the retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. So those are RAG type systems, and they have the role-based access in there, and it's all good.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, thank you for that. I think when we get into some of the demonstrations, this is gonna be like a show and tell. Part of this is to show you all some of the ways we've used the Ask AT&T, I'll say solution set, because there's more than one within our program, for optimization reasons, and I'll show you some of those things. But when we talk about where we started, at first we barely had an AI policy. We were pulling things from existing frameworks and existing requirements. And there was a lot of confusion and misunderstanding about what does it mean to interact with a GPT. Does that mean we're training the model? And therefore, how much control do we need to put around things like sensitive data or customer data and things like that? And we're going to get into some of the more mechanics of how we've segmented information in your architecture. Mm-hmm. But when you think about those days and the controls and the policies that we were working on putting in place, where do you think we need to be going next as a program? I would start with, I know in Rich Bache's session with Solero, we talked a lot about data inventory, but just inventory of data, inventory of models. How do you think about that, and where are we going with that?
Yeah. So a few things come to mind. I think one of them is inheriting. If something's already governed that you've already set up and it's approved, then you can maybe just inherit that governance, right? So you can pull that in. But one thing that bothers me a little bit when you think about some of the things, it's kind of governed if you think about SharePoint, but maybe it's not totally reviewed, right? So some of these things that are out there is that has kind of some governance on it, so we kind of need to check it. And I think where you might be going is maybe automated ways to kind of understand the type of data that's actually there, and is it appropriate? That, do we just allow anything that's on SharePoint, just inherit that directly? I think we need to probably do some checking to double check some of those things too.
Yeah. There's always that balance between risk and opportunity, right? Especially with AI, it seems like every single use case has both. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let me, I have one more question. You were telling me backstage on kind of how the coding community in AT&T is using this and what the business results have been, because I think it's really powerful. I think it is. You tell me. How have the results been on that?
So I mentioned coding was like the first thing, and believe it or not, it's still close to 40% of the questions that are going in there. But we've set up this entire group that is automating the software development lifecycle with generative AI, and it's not just the coding piece. They're looking what happens before coding, where you're trying to get the user stories, pull those out automatically, and then automatically generate the code. And then afterwards, what happens, you automatically generate the test scripts, and then you automatically check for vulnerabilities. And some of the cool facts that are coming out of this is, in the piece where you're doing the coding, since we have generative AI helping, they're accepting about a third of all the code generated. is they're accepting off of Generative, and it's hundreds of thousands of lines per day that is automatically generated that they're actually using into their application. So it's pretty impressive there.
It's a lot of optimization.
Yeah.
I have questions I'll save for afterwards. Do you ever think you were going to be in a room full of security people asking about the controls that we have in place?
No.
Okay, so as just on background, as Mark's team was standing up their practice, my team was standing up a review and assessment practice to ride shotgun with them. And that was, it was an experience trying to move as fast as the business wanted to adopt this, probably faster than any technology I've seen, at least in my career here. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty, and it remains pretty intense. But we started looking at it and thinking, well, wait a minute, we need some of that stuff in our program too. So one of the 600 use cases, or whatever you said the number was a group of use cases from our security program. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. We branded it AskCSO. CSO is the name of our cybersecurity organization here at AT&T, if you don't know. So again, this is show and tell. I'm going to give you 3 types of examples here, and Mark's going to help us understand how that technology is working behind the scenes. So first thing is, I think we're going to play video number 1 here. And there's no sound, so you don't have to read this, but this is just to have background information. So the first thing we wanted to do was really leverage how a GPT LLM is very good at language. And so at the time, one of my responsibilities was managing and owning our security policies and standards. That's a difficult challenge. I don't know how many of you have gone into GRC, but it's harder than it seems like it should be, managing a bunch of documents and a bunch of language. And so the first thing we did was really just had the GPT look at our policies and say, how much can we simplify this language? So simplifying the language, it's really good at identifying logic in big sets of information. So looking for opportunities to clarify requirements, removing circular logic, deconflicting requirements from one domain to another domain, and then some more advanced things, but still just using the GPT, or the LLM rather, looking at every standard. We looked at every single standard that in our portfolio, and that's a lot. If you work here, you know. If you don't work here, it's a lot, trust me. What we didn't have was a way to prioritize across all of them. So we used the LLM to suggest risk weightings for every single one of our standards. I don't want to say, I think it took maybe 3 or 4 weeks to do using the ChatGPT, or Ask AT&T, I should say. Apologize if that offends you. And it was a project that we had wanted to do for years, but it seemed so enormous and difficult that we kept putting it off, and it would get lower priorities. So just being able to crank through big language problems like that is super powerful. So Mark, in that era, so maybe the first 2 quarters of Ask AT&T being live, was that the kind of use cases you were seeing? And is that still what you see, is just using the LLM for basic language management capabilities?
I mean, people use it across the board. I mean, brainstorming is useful, just, come up with ideas, the way you used it. But I would say our top use case, we call it Ask Docs. So that's just asking questions of documents, right? So much like you were saying, you're trying to ask questions and kind of get the responses back off of internal knowledge that you want to surface as well. That's the teaching it about Ask AT&T.
Yeah, in that use case, the language model didn't know anything about AT&T, other than just what it came sort of out of the box from OpenAI or Microsoft or whoever delivered it. So Ask Docs is a different story, and I want to get into our next use case here. So if you could play the next video, I call this the better use case. And again, there's no sound, so you don't have to try to read this. I'm just going to talk sort of through kind of what we were trying to do, and then Mark's going to help us understand the tech behind it and why, why it's important the way that it's built. So this is the actual AskCSO chatbot. It's a RAG architecture. So a couple of things. In our use cases, we needed to prioritize. So Mark said they put it on the business unit to prioritize their use cases, and we honestly couldn't decide. We had 5 that we wanted to pursue across multiple different things. So one was we wanted to be able to use the AI experience to help sort of superpower help desk kinds of experiences, like how do I do this? How do I do that? Should I do this? Should I not do that? Guidance. But we also wanted to make sure that our actual requirements were available through that chatbot experience. And then we had a couple of other use cases like that, but we ended up with sort of 5 domains of knowledge that we wanted to deliver through a single chatbot experience. So Mark, can you talk a little bit about just Ask Docs, and then I'm going to show the architecture that you all helped us come up with for AskCSO, and if you could walk us through it, because there's some interesting things in there.
So I'll start high level first. So Ask Docs is just like it sounds, asking questions of documents. So it goes by the retrieval augmented generation, but you're basically loading up your documents. Now the cool thing is we've enabled that self-service now. So when we first started out, it was all coding. We had to help it, but now it's point and click. So you basically point to wherever your documents are, and we can ingest from Snowflake, SharePoint, wherever it is, and it'll load them in. And it loads them into a search function, which is called a vector database. So a vector database is how it actually retrieves things, right? So it turns your question into a vector set of numbers, and it matches those to the closest set of numbers from the actual documents. Now, the reason we do that is you can't load the entire documents into your large language model. So you have to put them in chunks, and it's retrieving the chunks of the document when you ask the question. Now, what's a little bit unique here, and Dan kind of helped us pioneer this thing, is we have lots of different documents. In CSO, I think you had, 5 or so, right? Now, when you ask the question, the different domains, right? Security policies, network security, cloud security, consulting, whatever it is. When we first started out, you had to pick the domain. I'm asking questions of this domain. I'm asking questions of HR. I'm asking questions of this. You shouldn't really have to do that. You should just ask a question, right? It should figure out where that answer is. So that's what you see, that thing in the middle there. That's the intelligent router, okay? So when you ask a question, what we do is we use a little bit of old school, traditional data science, and we match the question with the appropriate domain so you don't have to think, okay? So it's a binary classification, scores them all, and it says, oh, you're asking about this domain. You don't see that. It just gives you the answer, right? Okay, so like I said, we're up to 140 different domains now. And we knew it was going to become unwieldy, so we said, we got to get this intelligent router. We're going to do it at scale. Just another example outside of this one is we have all of customer care, all of retail. We got 50,000 agents that are using our RAG system, Ask AT&T, to get answered. I think even we had second quarter earnings, we reported that they're 33% faster in getting answers to their questions with this thing. So this is something that I would never know where to go. I wouldn't even know what domain to pick in CSO sometimes, right? So I just want to ask the question, and that intelligent router looks in the, picks the right domain, goes to the vector store, pulls it out, and then it goes down to the bottom part there. Has a little bit of memory, so you can do context, so you can do following questions. I don't get that, explain it more. It knows what you're talking about, it'll explain it more, right? And then it gives you the answer there. So that's the basic architecture, and Dan's team was kind of the pioneer to kind of encourage this. So now we're deploying intelligent router across all of Ask AT&T as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. The other thing I wanted to talk about on this, because when you work, so those of you that work here at AT&T, if you go out and get the AskCSO chatbot, you can play with it. But one of the things hopefully you'll find is that it won't answer questions that are outside of these domains. And it's not as fun. I have a folder full of multi-factor authentication haikus and epic poems and things like that from regular ChatGPT. But one of the more important things of a solution like this is it can't not be wrong.
That's a real geek thing you did.
I know.
Great resource.
No, this is at home, John. It's at home. No, you can audit my configuration and find out. Sorry. So it's really important that answers to questions like, what are the requirements? What are the security requirements and controls? What's the right procedure to use? It's really important that it's never incorrect on that. So can you talk just a little bit about how you defend against that in the design?
So I should have went into, so we don't just kind of create the vectors and load them in the vector store. We grade ourselves. So we have very extensive grading, and we can automatically generate questions and answers from the documents, but we also like the actual subject matter expert to verify those too. So we do that. I think we've graded over 1,800 of these RAG pipelines. We put them on the leaderboard, and that's how we compete. And believe it or not, we actually tune these things, both the vectors and how big is the chunk? Do you do a chunk with overlap and all sorts of different things? And how do you get the answers? Do you re-rank it? But all of those things goes into the accuracy. And we also check for hallucinations, and then we check for groundedness on the results. But all that goes in, very extensive. So it's, GenAI is so easy now. Almost anybody could do a proof of concept. But doing it at scale with high accuracy is really where kind of the finesse comes in there.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. All right, so those are my good and better examples. That's my grading scale, good and better. And then my next one is maybe better with a question mark, because it's a proof of concept that we're doing with Mark's help. And so we have a third video. I just want to show you one of the ways we think we're going to go next.
What are AT&T cybersecurity requirements for application development and deployment?
AT&T's cybersecurity requirements for application development and deployment include following standardized processes: conducting security reviews like SCSD, SCA, and DSD, and adhering to the AT&T security policies and standards, ASPS. These ensure security, scalability, and quality.
Where can I find more information about hardening web application security?
You can find more information about hardening web application security by visiting the Security Consulting and Project Engagement website, which provides guidelines and resources related to security in the development and delivery process.
Which AT&T security policy governs the secure deployment of APIs?
The AT&T security policy that governs the secure deployment of APIs is part of the AT&T security policies and standards, ASPS, specifically under the Domain Security Policy, DSP.
Okay, so just a couple of things on that. One of the things we did, so first of all, it was a chore to get legal and PR to let us talk about our policies at all. So, some of the examples there are a little bit generic. But two things, Mark. On the first question was about the security policies. Second question was about our consulting, like our help desk environment. And then the third question was about, I don't remember the third question. It was back to policy, I think. Mm-hmm. So, and we were specifically trying to exercise the intelligent router in that demo. Can you, you mentioned, how many domains are you managing now with the intelligent router?
There's 140 that we have on the list.
140.
Yeah.
And
55 in production, but yeah.
And so the technology that's used to, is it like a sentiment analysis, or how does it actually decide if you're asking about a particular domain?
Yeah. So we use it's a binary classification, and we basically take every single question, you almost map it to a vector, and you're trying to find the closest space versus all the ones that remember we had a training list, right? So we had all these questions, we know these questions are for this domain, these questions are for that domain, and then we actually take a new question and we find which question is it the closest to, right? Very similar to kind of how you're doing the vector matching as well. So that's kind of how we do the classification. And we put it on a score of 0 to 1, and we pick the highest one, and that's the domain that we route it to. And it seems to be working very well.
Yeah. So some of the things, I'm really interested in that avatar because, I mean, backstage you just blew my mind as how it works underneath the hood. Maybe we can talk about that. But just in terms of, I just want to make sure that everyone's tracking with why we're doing this. So the first two use cases were all about, there's always a need for better and clearer guidance and support for your personnel and your employee base, which isn't a static, that's a group of people that changes over time, sometimes frequently, sometimes infrequently, and getting them a resource that helps them understand what the requirements and policies are without dropping them into an Archer database is hugely important. But the other thing is with the avatar, what we're really looking for is accessibility. Mm-hmm. So when you, in your AskCSO, Ask AT&T use cases, I know you expand into like graphics and music and all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of how you think about the potential use of avatars, digital avatars in the environment?
Yeah. I mean, it's, not everybody wants to chat. Everybody wants to type, right? So voice is a great interface. You can see we still have a little bit of work to do on the delay, the natural sounding voice, but it's coming a long way. And I think this one's not even the latest version. I think the other one is I think we're down to like a second actual delay. Now behind the scenes, it's doing all that stuff on the right. It's doing the routing, it's doing the RAG lookup, and we have the speech to text and the text to speech. They're on top of it as well. So. It's pretty useful, and on top of this, we're even trying it in stuff like fiber byflow, right? If you have a customer, maybe you can even go into a retail store. If they don't want to stand in line, what if you had an avatar, and they could kind of chat with that, right? Don't know if it's a little bit of a nuance because it's new, but just some of the initial things we're seeing, people tend to engage more with that versus a straight chat. But it might be just the first time they've seen it, so we're actually testing that. But be very curious how that goes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the content I have here. Yes, it is. So I think we'll probably have time for a couple of questions. But Mark, thank you very much. Thanks for you and your team's support on AskCSO and all you do. And for the audience, thank you very much for paying attention. And being here today, really appreciate it. And hopefully, if this makes sense to you, something you can do in your practice, it's been helpful for us. And I'd love to hear your feedback. But do we have time for questions, Dietz?
Got a couple questions from the chat I'd like to share, if y'all don't mind. So, what target proportion of AT&T's environment do you see being involved with AI going forward?
That's a you question.
Target portion.
What's your goal?
I think it's going to touch everywhere.
Jeremy's over there
right?
now. So
yeah, it's going to touch everywhere. I mean, here's the thing. I actually asked ChatGPT that, and I basically asked it, what % of all knowledge worker jobs could you automate? And the answer was 40%. Now, it's 40% of the tasks, so not the entire job. And we always tell our own folks, look, it might not be AI that's going to replace you, but somebody that's armed with AI is really going to do a lot better. So you better learn these tools. You better learn these techniques. So I think it's going to touch everywhere to some extent on every task, some portion of your tasks.
Okay. One more question. So how do you handle AI hallucinations when it comes to security advice?
I'll start with that one. We try to avoid it. Like that. honestly, if you look at not the topic, the hallucination. So the way AskCSO was architected and designed was specifically to try to avoid situations where it gives incorrect information or gets off topic. It's not perfect. I mean, it is still an emerging technology, but the AskDocs architecture and segmenting information, and you probably do some things with the sort of the temperature of the model. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important. One of the big things is providing citations for your answer, right? So the one bad thing about ChatGPT, you get an answer, but you have no idea where it got it from, right? So that's the beauty of this RAG architecture. So we give an answer, we cite everything, right? So if you don't think that looks strange, you go down and you say, where did that come from? And then you can check it, right? So that's super important as one of the ways. And then prompting helps on top of that as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, gents, we are out of time. Thank you both very much for coming out here today.
Thanks, Dietz. Appreciate you.
Good.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Mark.